The radio crackled with static, then silence. Command replayed the transmission 3 times before anyone spoke. 6 words delivered in a voice stripped of everything but fact. "We can't hold past dawn." The SEAL team had been dark for 11 hours. Satellites showed nothing. Drones couldn't penetrate the weather. Somewhere in the Korangal Valley, Call Sign Griffon 6 was bleeding out under a sky that offered no mercy, surrounded by an enemy that had learned patience. The operations center at Bagram felt like a tomb. Colonel Reeves stood before the tactical display, jaw tight, eyes tracing invisible routes through mountains that had swallowed better men than him. Every aircraft was grounded. The storm system sprawling across the Hindu Kush had turned the air into a weapon, downdrafts violent enough to shred metal, visibility measured in feet not miles. Apache pilots had tried twice. Both times they'd turned back, rotors icing, instruments screaming warnings that couldn't be ignored. The meteorologist kept repeating the same assessment. "Nothing flies in this." Reeves didn't argue. He'd flown combat missions in Desert Storm. He knew when nature became the enemy. Then a voice cut through the tension, quiet but clear. "I'll go." Every head turned. Captain Myra Revenant Cowery stood at the back of the room, flight suit creased from 8 hours in standby, dark eyes reflecting the glow of the monitors. She wasn't tall, wasn't loud. Most of the men in that room had never seen her fly. She'd been assigned to the 354th Fighter Squadron only 6 weeks prior, transferred in from a stint flying support missions so routine they barely made the logs. Reeves looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "You're A-10 qualified." His tone carried the question beneath the question. "You think you can do what the Apache crews couldn't?" Cowery didn't flinch. "The Warthog handles weather different, lower, slower. I can thread the valleys." Someone laughed, short and bitter. Captain Dalton, an Apache pilot who turned back an hour ago, his knuckles still white from gripping the stick through turbulence that had nearly torn his bird apart. "Thread the valleys," he repeated, shaking his head. "You'll be a crater before you clear the ridgeline." Cowery's expression didn't change. She'd heard doubt before, worn it like a second skin through every assignment, every briefing where her call sign drew smirks instead of nods. Revenant. They thought it was dark, melodramatic. They didn't know what she'd survived to earn it. Reeves studied her for 5 seconds that felt like minutes. 6 men were dying in the mountains. The storm wouldn't break for another 18 hours. He'd exhausted every option, every protocol. Now he was staring at a captain with fewer than 200 combat hours proposing to fly a 30-ton gun platform through conditions that had turned back his best crews. The math was brutal. The choice was worse. He nodded once. "Get to your bird." The room erupted. Dalton stood, face flushed. "Sir, this is..." "Dismissed, Captain." Reeves didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Cowery was already walking toward the door, boots echoing on concrete, each step carrying the weight of what came next. Outside, the wind screamed across the tarmac, carrying ice and the smell of jet fuel. Her A-10 sat alone on the hardstand, ugly and perfect titanium bathtub cockpit gleaming dully under the floodlights. The ground crew looked at her like she was insane. Maybe she was. She ran her pre-flight by muscle memory, hands moving across switches and gauges while her mind calculated angles, fuel loads, weapon configurations. The Warthog wasn't graceful. It didn't need to be. Built around a cannon that could shred tanks, armored like a flying bunker, slow enough to see the battlefield and tough enough to bring its pilot home through hell. Tonight, hell had coordinates and a ticking clock. She strapped in, helmet snug, oxygen flowing, the cockpit suddenly intimate and small. Her hands found the throttles. Outside, the storm turned the night into chaos, but inside this machine, everything made sense. She'd been flying since she was 19, daughter of a Lebanese immigrant mechanic who taught her that engines spoke a language most people never learned. She'd soloed in a Cessna before she could legally drink, joined the Air Force because the sky was the only place she'd ever felt like she belonged. But belonging and respect were different things. She'd spent 8 years proving herself in a world that saw her call sign before her skill, her gender before her record. Every flight was an audition. Every mission a test she had to pass twice as well to earn half the recognition. Revenant. She'd chosen it herself after a night mission over Helmand Province 3 years back. Engine fire, hydraulics failing, half her instruments dark. She brought the crippled bird home through a sandstorm, landed on fumes and sheer will. The maintenance chief had stared at the wreckage, then at her and said, "You should be dead." She'd smiled, tasted blood from a bitten lip and replied, "I came back instead." The name stuck. The respect didn't, not yet. But tonight wasn't about respect. Tonight was about 6 men who needed someone crazy enough to fly into a storm that gods would avoid. She pushed the throttles forward. The twin turbofans spooled up, their howls swallowed by the wind. Tower gave her clearance with reluctance in every syllable. She released brakes and the Warthog lurched forward, heavy and purposeful, accelerating down the runway while rain hammered the canopy like stones. Rotation speed. Pull back. The aircraft lifted, sluggish and stable, clawing into air that wanted to kill her. The ride immediately turned violent. Turbulence slammed her against the straps, instruments flickering, the horizon a meaningless blur beyond the canopy. She flew on gauges and instinct, trimming constantly, fighting for every foot of altitude. The Apache pilots hadn't been wrong. This was nightmare flying, the kind that ended careers or lives. But the A-10 was built for punishment. And so was she. She banked east toward the mountains that rose invisible in the storm, GPS showing the valleys as thin lines through terrain that had no forgiveness. Her radio crackled. "Revenant Overlord, say status." Reeves' voice stripped of everything but the mission. 2 minutes to valley entry, weather is sporty, the understatement of the year. Another voice cut in, younger, uncertain. "Revenant, Griffon 6 actual, we hear you coming." The SEAL team leader. His transmission was weak, broken by static and distance. She could hear gunfire in the background, sharp cracks that told stories of desperation. "Griffon 6, Revenant. Hold tight, I'm bringing the thunder." "Copy that. We're on the North Ridge, grid November Victor 3728. Enemy has us pinned from 3 sides." Cowery pulled up the coordinates, overlaid them on terrain that looked impossible even in simulation. The SEALs were dug in on a ridgeline barely wide enough to land a helicopter, assuming you had a helicopter and a death wish. Enemy forces held the high ground, the low ground, and everything between. Standard doctrine said you didn't fly into that box without air superiority, artillery support, and a backup plan. She had none of those things. Just a cannon with 300 rounds of depleted uranium, 2 Maverick missiles, and the kind of recklessness that came from being underestimated so long you stopped caring about the odds. She dropped lower, threading between peaks she felt more than saw, relying on terrain-following radar and the sixth sense every attack pilot developed or died without. The Warthog shuddered through wind shear that would have torn apart lesser aircraft. Ice formed on the leading edges of her wings. She activated the de-icing systems and kept flying. 5 minutes to target. The weather began to break slightly, clouds thinning enough to show jagged silhouettes of mountains carved by millennia into shapes that defied reason. She caught glimpses of the ground, snow and rock and shadow. Somewhere down there, men were fighting for their lives against an enemy that knew these mountains like a lover knows skin. Her targeting pod came online, infrared cutting through the remaining haze. She saw them. Heat signatures clustered tight on the ridge, muzzle flashes from weapons firing at shapes that swarmed below like ants. The enemy had patience and numbers. The SEALs had determination and about 30 minutes of ammunition. She keyed her radio. "Griffon 6, Revenant, I have visual, mark your position with IR strobe." A pause, more gunfire, then, "Strobe's active. We're the ones not trying to kill you." Gallows humor. She liked this team already. The infrared strobes popped into view on her display, 6 pinpoints of light clustered together like stars refusing to go out. She painted the enemy positions, fingers dancing across the weapons panel. The A-10's targeting computer was older than some of the men she was here to save, but it worked with mechanical precision. 3 groups of fighters, 20 to 30 per group, advancing under cover of rocks and darkness. They thought they had the advantage. They thought wrong. She rolled inverted, pulled hard, came around in a diving turn that put her nose on the largest enemy concentration. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon spooled up with a sound like a chainsaw made of thunder. She squeezed the trigger. The universe split open. 30-millimeter rounds left the barrel at almost 4,000 per minute, each one the size of a milk bottle, traveling faster than sound. The recoil slowed the entire aircraft. The sound, described by men on the ground as the voice of God having a bad day, rolled across the valley like judgment made audible. She walked the stream of fire across the enemy position, watching through the targeting pod as shapes disappeared in explosions of earth and snow. The enemy scattered, survival instinct overriding tactics. She pulled up, gained altitude, came around for another pass. This time she saw return fire tracers rising toward her like angry fireflies. Small arms, maybe a heavy machine gun. Irrelevant. The A-10's titanium bathtub could take hits from 23 cannon fire. Rifle rounds were an insult, not a threat. She put a Maverick missile into the second enemy group, the infrared seeker finding body heat and turning it into a fireball that lit the mountainside. The third group was retreating, disappearing into caves and crevices. She let them go. Dead enemies couldn't radio for reinforcements, but scared enemies spread fear faster than bullets. Griffon 6, Revenant, how's your situation? Revenant, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and I'm including my wedding day. Laughter in his voice now, the kind that came after you'd accepted death and got a reprieve. Copy that. Sit tight, I'm establishing orbit. Nothing's getting to you while I'm overhead. She meant it. For the next 40 minutes she circled that ridgeline like a guardian angel carved from titanium and spite, dropping down whenever her sensors caught movement, sending bursts of cannon fire or the occasional missile into anything that looked hostile. The storm was breaking properly now, clouds pulling apart to reveal stars that had watched these mountains long before humans decided they were worth dying for. Dawn came slowly, gray light creeping across peaks that looked like the bones of the earth exposed. The enemy had vanished. The SEALs were still alive. Her fuel gauge showed 20 minutes remaining. Overlord Revenant, package secure, requesting extract coordinates. Revenant Overlord, Chinook is wheels up, ETA 15 minutes. Reeves' voice carried something she hadn't heard before. Respect maybe, or just relief. She stayed overhead until she saw the helicopter, a CH-47 that looked like a flying school bus but flew like it had something to prove. It landed hard on the ridge, rotors kicking up snow, and the SEALs moved with the efficiency of men who'd done this too many times. 30 seconds and they were aboard, the Chinook already lifting, banking away toward safety. Cowery turned for home. The flight back was smooth, almost peaceful, the storm's fury spent. She had time to think, to feel the adrenaline ebb and leave exhaustion in its wake. Her hands were steady on the stick. They always were. Training, genetics, stubbornness, she'd never figured out which. Didn't matter. She'd done what she came to do. That was enough. Or so she told herself. But landing at Bagram felt different. The ground crew that met her bird weren't just doing their jobs. They stared. Maintenance Chief Ramirez, a 20-year veteran who'd seen everything, walked around her aircraft twice before speaking. Ma'am, you took hits. 7 I can count, probably more underneath. She climbed down, legs unsteady, and looked. Bullet holes stitched across the tail section, a few in the wing, superficial. The A-10 had carried worse damage home and asked for seconds. She'll fly, Cowery said. Ramirez shook his head. That's not the point. You flew into that alone. Wasn't alone, had 6 guys counting on me. She walked toward the operations center, every step feeling heavier than it should. Fatigue, probably. Definitely. Inside, the room had changed. Same people, same screens, but the atmosphere was different. Dalton stood near the coffee station, staring at her like she performed a magic trick he couldn't figure out. Reeves gestured her to his office. She followed, hopping. This wasn't the part where she got chewed out for violating 50 safety regulations. The door closed. Reeves didn't sit, neither did she. That was either the bravest thing I've seen, he said quietly, or the most reckless. Yes, sir. He almost smiled, almost. The SEAL team leader wants to buy you a drink. His actual words were a drink and probably a car. I don't need a car, sir. I know, that's not why I called you in. He pulled something from his desk drawer, a folder. Inside, transfer orders. Her eyes scanned the text, not quite believing. Assignment to the 74th Fighter Squadron, the Flying Tigers. The premier A-10 unit, the one every Warthog driver dreamed of joining. The one she'd applied to twice and been rejected from both times. Sir, I don't. You're a combat pilot, Cowery. Not a support pilot, not a backup, the real thing. I should have seen it sooner. He extended his hand. She shook it, feeling the weight of years lifting. Congratulations, Revenant. Now get some rest. You've earned it. She left his office in a daze. Outside, the morning sun was burning the last clouds away, turning the sky into something vast and blue and full of promise. Dalton caught her in the hallway. He looked uncomfortable, like he was chewing glass. He struggled. I was wrong about you. She could have been gracious, should have been. Instead, she just nodded. Yeah, you were, and walked away, not cruel, just honest. She'd spent too long being diplomatic to people who saw her as a diversity checkbox or a liability. She was done with that. 3 days later, the story started spreading. Not through official channels, but the way all good military stories spread, over beers and in ready rooms, embellished slightly but rooted in truth. The captain who flew into a storm that grounded everyone else. The A-10 that carved a path through impossible odds. The call sign that suddenly made perfect sense. Revenant, she who returns from the dead, she who brings others back from the edge. The mockery was gone. In its place, something harder to quantify but impossible to miss. Respect. The kind earned in fire and blood, the kind that couldn't be given or taken, only proven. Her first day with the 74th Fighter Squadron started before sunrise. The ready room was exactly as she'd imagined it. Worn leather couches, walls covered in patches and photos, the smell of coffee and jet fuel. The other pilots looked up when she entered. No one spoke. Then the squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Boomer Hayes, stood and offered his hand. Heard you like flying in bad weather. It's calming, sir. He laughed, genuine and loud. You'll fit right in. Welcome to the Tigers. That night, sitting alone in her quarters, she wrote an email to her father, told him about the mission, the transfer, the way things were finally changing. He replied 2 hours later, despite the time zones and the distance. Just 4 words, but they meant everything. Proud of you, Habibti. She stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then she slept, deep and dreamless, the kind of sleep that only comes after you've pushed past every limit and found something on the other side. Something like peace. Or maybe just the knowledge that she'd finally become who she was always meant to be. The weeks that followed blurred together in a rhythm of missions and maintenance, dawn patrols and night strikes. The 74th flew hard and flew often, supporting ground operations across the theater. Cowery found herself slotting into the squadron like she'd been there for years. The pilots were good, better than good, and they treated her like one of them. No questions about her gender, no doubts about her ability. Just pilots talking shop, sharing tactics, arguing about aircraft performance with the passion of people who loved their jobs. She flew close air support for Marines pushing through contested valleys. She destroyed enemy armor that thought it was hidden in mountain passes. She became the voice on the radio that ground troops learned to trust, the A-10 that showed up when the situation went sideways and stayed until it was resolved. Her call sign spread beyond the squadron. Infantry units requested her by name. Forward air controllers traded stories about the pilot who flew lower and slower than anyone else, who could put ordnance on target so precisely you could danger close from 30 meters and live. But it was a mission 3 months after her transfer that cemented her legacy. A convoy ambush, 6 vehicles burning, casualties mounting, enemy fire coming from compounds so close to civilian structures that fast movers couldn't engage without massive collateral damage. She arrived overhead to chaos. The convoy commander, a young lieutenant whose voice cracked with stress, tried to explain the situation. Revenant, they're in the buildings mixed with civilians. I can't get clear fields of fire. We've got wounded who need extract, but we can't move. She studied the scene through her targeting pod, classic urban ambush. The enemy had learned that American pilots wouldn't fire on buildings that might hold innocents. They'd learned wrong. Convoy 6, I need you to mark the buildings where you're taking fire. Be precise. Revenant, there's civilians. I know. mark the buildings. He did, using laser designators that painted 3 structures. She saw the heat signatures, saw the muzzle flashes, saw the tactical problem that had no clean solution, except she'd trained for this. The A-10's cannon wasn't just a blunt instrument. In the right hands, it was a scalpel. She lined up on the first building, adjusted for wind and distance, breathed out slowly. The cannon fired in short bursts, 5-round pulses that punched through specific walls, specific windows. She could see the impacts through her pod, watched as return fire ceased from each position she engaged. Precision violence measured and controlled. The second building, then the third. Each one a careful dance between destruction and restraint, between mission success and moral catastrophe. When she finished, the enemy fire had stopped. The building still stood, damaged but not demolished. The convoy started moving, loading wounded, extracting under the cover she provided. Later, intelligence confirmed no civilian casualties. Every round she'd fired had hit hostile targets. The probability of that, the statistical nightmare of urban combat resolved through skill and judgment, made her something rare in a war that ground through pilots like ammunition. She became a case study. Instructors at the weapons school used her gun camera footage as teaching material. This, they'd say, pausing the video at the moment of impact, is what mastery looks like. But Cowery didn't think in terms of mastery. She thought in terms of people going home, of missions accomplished, of doing the job she'd sworn to do. The recognition was nice. The respect was better, but neither was the point. The point was the kid from Iowa who got to call his mom because she'd cleared the road ahead. The point was the SEAL team that made it back to base because she'd flown through a storm. The point was that the sky, that vast indifferent blue, had become something she could shape with skill and will into a weapon that protected those who needed protecting. 6 months into her assignment with the 74th, she was promoted to major. The ceremony was brief, professional. Hayes pinned the new rank on her shoulders and said, "Don't let it go to your head." She grinned. "No, sir." That night the squadron threw a party. Not for the promotion, promotions happened, but because it was Friday and they were alive, and that was enough. Cowery found herself cornered by Captain Jason Wick Kimura, a pilot she'd flown wing with on a dozen missions. He was holding a beer and wearing the expression of someone working up courage. "I gotta ask," he said, "what's it like being you doing this?" She considered the question, considered all the weight it carried. "It's like being anyone else doing this, just with more people watching." "That's not," he paused. "You know what I mean." She did, the unspoken question beneath the question. "What's it like being a woman in this world, proving yourself constantly, carrying the burden of representation?" "It's exhausting," she said honestly, "and worth it, because every mission where I perform, every flight where I prove the doubters wrong, I make it easier for the next woman who wants to do this. That matters." Wick nodded slowly. "You're a better person than me. I'd be angry." "Oh, I'm angry. I'm just productive about it." They laughed, the sound swallowed by music and conversation, and the moment passed. But it stayed with her. The idea that her presence, her success, was shifting something larger than individual prejudice. That she was, in some small way, changing the narrative. It felt too heavy some days, like she was carrying weight that shouldn't be hers to bear. But other days, when she saw younger female pilots at briefings, when she heard them speak with confidence that came from knowing the path was possible, she felt something else. Pride, purpose. The bone-deep satisfaction of knowing her struggles had meaning beyond herself. The war continued. Seasons changed, but the missions didn't. Cowery flew and fought and came home, each sortie adding to a record that spoke louder than any words. Her squadron rotated back to the States after a year. She spent 3 months instructing at the weapons school, passing on lessons learned in fire and blood. Then back to Afghanistan for another deployment. The cycle of military life, predictable and strange. On her second deployment with the 74th, she flew her 200th combat mission. The squadron made it a thing, gathering in the ready room after her landing, presenting her with a bottle of whiskey and a plaque that listed every mission, every ordnance expended, every life saved. Hayes gave a speech that was mercifully short. "Major Cowery represents everything this squadron stands for: excellence, courage, and the stubborn refusal to accept limitations that others try to impose. She's not just a great pilot, she's a great officer, and I'm honored to serve with her." The room erupted in applause. She felt her face flush, uncomfortable with the attention but grateful for the sentiment. That night, alone in her quarters, she looked at the plaque. 200 missions, thousands of hours in hostile airspace, countless moments where death was a mechanical failure or a split-second mistake away. She'd survived it all, thrived in it, become someone she barely recognized from the uncertain lieutenant who'd first strapped into an A-10. The woman she'd been would have been terrified of the woman she'd become, or maybe proud, probably both. She thought about call signs, about the names that defined military pilots. Some were jokes, some were insults turned badges of honor. Hers was different, revenant. The word carried weight now, history. It meant the pilot who came back, who brought others back, who refused to accept that some missions were impossible. It meant her. She'd earned it through blood and skill and sheer relentless determination. No one questioned it anymore. No one mocked it. When ground troops heard Revenant inbound, they knew salvation was 30 seconds away. When enemy fighters heard it, they knew the sky had turned hostile. A call sign was supposed to be a name. Hers had become a promise. The next morning she flew a routine patrol, nothing special, just hours of circling assigned airspace while monitoring radio traffic. Boring, necessary work. The kind that filled most of a military career between the moments that made headlines. She didn't mind. Boring meant no one was dying. Boring meant she could enjoy the simple pleasure of flight, the responding to her touch like an extension of her will. Up here above the clouds, the war felt distant, just her and the sky and the endless blue that had always felt like home. The radio crackled. Revenant Overlord. Request immediate divert to grid Papa Romeo 7742. Troops in contact, heavy engagement. Boring ended. She banked hard, pushed the throttles forward, felt the warthog surge with purpose. Copy Overlord, 5 minutes out. The distant sound of someone's bad day becoming hers to resolve. She smiled, not from joy at violence, but from the satisfaction of knowing her purpose. This was what she did. This was who she was, Revenant, she who returns, she who saves, she who carves paths through fire so others can walk through untouched. The mountains rose ahead and she dropped lower, hunting for the grid coordinates, already running through weapon configurations and attack profiles. Another mission, another chance to bring someone home, and she would, because that's what revenants do. They come back, they bring others back, they refuse to let death have the final word. The sky stretched endless above her and she owned every inch of it, not through arrogance but through skill earned in the hardest school imaginable. The engagement lasted 40 minutes. Enemy fighters dug into a hillside, pinning down a squad of Army Rangers who'd been caught in the open during a patrol. Standard nightmare scenario, the kind that ended with body bags and investigations. Except she arrived. 3-gun runs, methodical and devastating. She could see the enemy positions, see them trying to reposition, see them realize too late that the strange aircraft circling overhead wasn't leaving. The GAU-8 spoke its language of thunder and the hillside came apart. When she finished, the Rangers were moving, dragging wounded, anger and relief mixing in their radio transmissions. The squad leader's voice came through rough. "Revenant, I don't know who you are, but I'm naming my firstborn after you." She laughed despite herself. "Make it a middle name. Revenant's hard to spell." Flying back to base, fuel low and ammunition expended, she felt the familiar mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. Another day in the war. Another group of soldiers going home because she'd been in the right place with the right weapons and the right skills. The math was simple, brutal but simple. She saved lives by taking them, protected the innocent by destroying the guilty, flew into harm's way so others didn't have to. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was necessary. And she was good at it, better than good. The best if the mission reports and commendations meant anything. She'd stopped downplaying her abilities years ago. False modesty helped no one. She was an exceptional combat pilot. Acknowledging that wasn't arrogance. It was fact. The years continued their relentless march. Deployments and training cycles, upgrades and new tactics, the slow evolution of warfare and the unchanging reality of combat. Cowrie flew through it all, racking up hours and missions and a reputation that preceded her into every new assignment. She made lieutenant colonel, then colonel. Each promotion brought new responsibilities, less flight time, more administrative work. She hated the desk but understood its necessity. Leadership meant more than flying. It meant shaping policy, training the next generation, ensuring the lessons she'd learned in blood weren't forgotten. She became an advocate for women in combat aviation, not through speeches or political activism, but through the simple act of excellence. Every mission flown perfectly was an argument no one could refute. Every pilot she mentored who went on to their own success was proof that talent had no gender. The Air Force was changing, slowly, grudgingly, but changing. More women in cockpits, more voices in briefing rooms that didn't sound the same. She'd like to think she'd played some small part in that evolution. Or maybe she was just one pilot in a larger tide of history, swept along by forces beyond her control. Probably both. Definitely both. Her final deployment came 15 years after that first storm mission. She was a full colonel now, commanding the 74th Fighter Squadron. Her call sign remained, a courtesy extended to senior officers who'd earned their names in combat. She still flew when she could, still felt the same surge of purpose when strapping into the A-10's cockpit. But this deployment felt different, heavier. She'd seen too many friends die, too many young pilots arrive fresh-faced and leave haunted. The war had ground on longer than anyone expected, metastasizing from clear mission to murky occupation, from justified response to exhausted routine. She was tired. Not physically, though the years of high-G maneuvers and long missions had taken their toll on her body. Spiritually tired. Tired of the cycle, of the same valleys and mountains and enemies who replaced themselves faster than she could eliminate them. But she kept flying. Because that's what you did. Because men and women on the ground still needed the sky to protect them. Because walking away before the job was done wasn't in her nature. Her last combat mission happened on a Tuesday. Routine patrol that turned into a nightmare when a convoy hit an IED and came under coordinated attack. She responded with 3 other A-10s, a formation of warthogs that descended on the ambush like biblical wrath. They destroyed the enemy in minutes, turned a potential massacre into a tactical victory, and orbited overhead until the wounded were evacuated and the convoy was moving again. Landing back at base, taxiing to the hardstand, shutting down the engines, each action felt heavy with finality. She knew, with the certainty that comes from knowing yourself, that this was the last time. 15 years of combat flying, hundreds of missions, thousands of hours in hostile airspace. She'd survived it all, which made her lucky or skilled or both. But luck ran out and skill couldn't hold back time forever. She was done, not with the Air Force, not with flying, but with this, with the war, with the weight of carrying death in her hands and calling it protection. That evening, she submitted her request for reassignment stateside. Hayes approved it without question. He understood. They all did, eventually. There was a season for war and a season for something else. Her season here was ending. The squadron threw her a farewell party that was really a wake for the part of herself she was leaving behind. They told stories, each one embellished but rooted in truth. The storm mission had become legend, details sharpened by repetition until she barely recognized it. But she let them tell it. Let them shape the story into the version that meant something, that inspired, that reminded everyone why they did this impossible job. She gave a short speech, thanking them for their professionalism and their friendship. She didn't cry. Military officers didn't cry, especially not women who'd spent careers proving they were tough enough. But her voice caught once briefly, and that was enough. They understood. 3 days later, she flew out on a C-17, leaving Afghanistan behind with mixed feelings she didn't try to sort out. Relief and regret tangled together, pride and sorrow. The complex emotions of closing a chapter that had defined her for so long she barely remembered who she'd been before. The plane climbed into clear sky, and she looked down at mountains that had tried to kill her more times than she could count. They looked peaceful from up here, almost beautiful, the lie of distance. Back in the States, she took command of a training squadron, teaching young pilots how to fly the A-10, how to survive combat, how to be competent and confident and compassionate all at once. It was satisfying work, different from combat but no less important. She was shaping the future, one pilot at a time. Some of them were women. Not many, but more than when she'd started. They looked at her with a mix of admiration and relief. Proof that the path was possible, proof that they could do this. She tried to be worthy of that trust, tried to teach them not just how to fly, but how to navigate the invisible obstacles that would be thrown in their way, how to turn doubt into determination, how to make their call signs mean something. Years passed. She made brigadier general, a rank so senior she rarely flew anymore. The A-10 program was under constant threat of retirement, replaced by newer aircraft that looked sleeker but couldn't do the close air support mission with the same effectiveness. She fought for the Warthog in meetings and budget hearings, using every ounce of credibility she'd earned to keep the platform alive. It wasn't about nostalgia. It was about capability. The saved lives, period. Everything else was politics. Eventually, inevitably, she retired. 30 years of service ended with a ceremony at Arlington where generals she'd never met praised her career and contributions. She stood in her dress uniform, chest heavy with medals that represented moments she'd rather forget and missions she'd never regret, and listened to them turn her life into a narrative. It wasn't wrong, exactly, just incomplete. The story they told was about excellence and breaking barriers and inspiring future generations. All true. But it missed the terror of that first storm mission, the exhaustion of proving yourself every single day, the rage at being underestimated, the satisfaction of proving them wrong, the complicated pride of being a symbol when you just wanted to be a pilot. It missed the humanity, the cost, the nights lying awake wondering if you'd made the right call, if the people you'd killed had deserved it, if the people you'd saved would have survived anyway. It missed the truth that heroism and trauma were often the same thing viewed from different angles. But she smiled and shook hands and accepted the praise because that's what you did. You let them have their story. You kept the complicated parts for yourself. After retirement, she bought a small house in Colorado, near the mountains but not too near. Somewhere she could see the sky but didn't have to think about what happened in it. She consulted for the Air Force occasionally, gave speeches at military academies, mentored young officers who sought her out. But mostly she just existed, learning to be a person instead of a pilot, an individual instead of a symbol. It was harder than combat. One morning, drinking coffee on her porch while watching the sun paint the clouds gold, she got an email. A young captain, recently assigned to the 74th Fighter Squadron. She'd written to thank Cowery for inspiring her career, for proving it was possible. The email was earnest and awkward and sincere. Cowery read it twice, feeling something shift in her chest. Not pride exactly, something deeper. The knowledge that her struggles had mattered, that the path she'd carved through doubt and fire had made it easier for someone else to follow, that her legacy wasn't the missions or the medals but the possibility she'd created. She wrote back, keeping it brief. Offered advice about flying the Warthog, about handling pressure, about staying true to yourself when the world wanted you to be something else. Then she set down her phone and looked at the sky, vast and blue and full of memory. She'd spent most of her life up there, fighting and flying and proving herself over and over until she'd finally run out of people to prove anything to. It had been worth it. Every flight, every mission, every moment of doubt transformed into determination. Worth it. Not because she'd become a general or earned respect or broken barriers, but because she'd done the job, protected those who needed protecting. Carved paths through fire so others could walk through untouched. That was enough. That was everything. The sky held her gaze and she held its memory, and in the space between them was a life lived with purpose. A legacy earned in thunder and written in the contrails of an ugly, perfect aircraft that refused to die. Revenant. The name still fit.